You're lying, immobilized and vulnerable on the operating table. Something is wrong, but you hope it can be repaired. As the anesthesia sets in, you reflect. To be sure, your brain hasn't always performed the way you'd wished it had. You've had some mistakes, you've done some stupid things, regrettable things, wrong things, but still, it is the brain that allows for a reconsideration of all that, to adjust, to have some hope, and some possibility of doing better next time. Your brain keeps you going, keeps you in touch with the world. Hopefully, yours can be repaired, and you can get back to thinking, being, becoming. You can get better. As darkness descends, you catch a glimpse of the person dressed as a surgeon, approaching your head with a knife and a smile. It's Tulsi Gabbard. Hope gives way to horror. This dark fantasy suggests, on a very small scale, the national trauma that lies before us. Gabbard is Donald Trump's choice to operate American intelligence. In the intelligence system, a kind of national brain, the Director of National Intelligence oversees and coordinates the work of agencies charged with knowing the world, protecting the integrity of digital systems, anticipating and preventing terrorism, and evaluating national security threats. Gabbard is the opposite of qualified for such a role. She is a disinformer and as an apologist for the war crimes of dictatorships. Gabbard appears on the world stage as a defender of 1 million violent deaths. She is an apologist for 2 of the great atrocities of the century: the Russian-Syrian suppression of the Russian opposition to Bashar al-Assad dictatorship, which has taken about 500,000 lives, most of them civilians, some of them by chemical weapons, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has also taken about 500,000 lives and has brought the destruction of whole cities, the kidnapping of children, mass torture, and the large-scale executions of civilians. That's it. That is her profile. Disinformer and apologist. Beyond the United States, in the larger world that U.S. intelligence agencies are tasked to understand, she is associated with her pro-Assad and pro-Putin positions. In third place, I suppose, would be her propensity to provide the Chinese state media with useful sound bites. In 2014, Gabbard said nothing remarkable about foreign affairs. In 2015, just before Putin intervened to save Assad, she began her extraordinary journey of apology for atrocity. In September of that year, Putin sent Russian mercenaries, soldiers, and airmen to Syria to defend Assad. The great advantage Putin could bring to Assad was to multiply the regime's airstrikes, which were turned against hospitals and other civilian targets. Hospitals were and remain a Russian specialty. In June of 2015, as a congresswoman from Hawaii, Gabbard visited Syria. During her stay, she was introduced to girls who had been burned from head to toe by a regime airstrike. Her reaction to the situation, according to her translator, was to try to persuade the girls that they had been injured not by Syrian forces, but by the resistance. But this was impossible. Only Syria, at the time of her visit, and Russia, beginning weeks later, were flying planes and dropping bombs. Either Gabbard was catastrophically uninformed about the most basic elements of the theater of war she was visiting, or she was consciously spreading disinformation. Those are the 2 possibilities. The first is disqualifying. The second is worse. And if she was spreading disinformation consciously, she was also doing so with a pathological ruthlessness. Anyone who would lie to the child victims of an airstrike to their burned faces would lie to anyone about anything. In January of 2017, she visited Syria again, this time to speak to Assad. She began thereafter to deny that his regime had used chemical weapons on its own people. That was a very big lie. In Washington, in speeches to Congress, Gabbard showed an uncanny ability to turn almost any issue into a justification for defending the Assad regime. In 2016, concern for Christians in Syria was a pretext to defend the Assad regime. In 2017, she presented worries about terrorism as a reason to defend the Assad regime. In 2018, the anniversary of 9/11, was her prompt for defending the Assad regime. In 2019, she found her way from the genocide of Armenians a century earlier to the need to defend the Assad regime. She even worked hard to segue from the lack of affordable housing in Hawaii to the need to defend the Assad regime. Gabbard's support of Assad was so well known to her that her colleagues, Republican and Democrat alike, were worried that she would reveal the identity of a Syrian photographer brought to Congress to testify about Assad's atrocities. For Russia, Syria was a testing ground for Ukraine. The atrocities perpetrated by Russians in Syria were repeated in Ukraine. In 2021, the largest donor to Gabbard's PAC was an apologist for Putin. When the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February of the following year, Gabbard, a consumer of Russian propaganda, was immediately ready as a channel for the Russian line, using obvious Russian disinformation. Again and again, over and over, her public statements were strikingly similar to Putin's. Amidst the farrago of lies that Russia used to justify its full-scale invasion was the completely bogus claim that Ukraine was a site of American biolabs that were testing which infections would be most harmful to Slavs and thus Russians. This lie originates in Russia and was spread by Russian media, along with some Chinese and Syrio echo chambers, and with a set of Western helpers, one of whom was Tulsi Gabbard. She also urged, quote, in the spirit of aloha, end quote, that Ukraine react to the invasion by surrendering its sovereignty to Russia. She later justified Russia's invasion of Ukraine by the notion common in Moscow that Russia was the victim of American attempts to overthrow Putin. She was specifically thanked by Russian state media for defending Russian war propaganda. To be sure, the wars in the regions are complex. Even if Assad falls, as now looks increasingly likely, Syria will be a mess with unsavory and dangerous people in power. There is, of course, room for disagreement about American foreign policy, including with respect to Assad and Putin and their twinned atrocity. That can be all taken for granted, but provides no excuse whatever for Gabbard's very unusual behavior. It is strange, to say the least, that Gabbard says nothing about these regimes that they have not first said about themselves, and that she uses her platform to spread their own very specific disinformation. One feature of the disinformation that is factually incorrect, and so the very least or most that can be said about Gabbard, is that she is consistently wrong on matters of the greatest moral and political significance. But the other element of disinformation that it is consciously and maliciously designed to confuse. These memes, biolabs, are tested and perfected before they are released. Disinformation is the opposite of an innocent mistake. It is concocted to make rational reflection and sensible policy difficult. Disinformation, in other words, as a weapon that one regime tries to spread within another society, or in the dream of a hostile spy chief within another society's intelligence service. That is part of what Gabbard offers America's enemies. And it is bad enough because it means that systems meant to protect Americans instead of put them in danger. It goes without saying that American allies would be unable to cooperate with the United States, and that patriotic intelligence officers would resign in droves. Informers around the world would cease their work. The U.S. government would be cut off from the world. As Director of National Intelligence, Gabbard would do enormous harm, willingly or unwillingly. She is not just completely unqualified for this role, she is anti-qualified. She is just the sort of person enemies of the American Republic would want in this job. This is not hypothetical. Gabbard is the specific person that actual enemies of the United States want in the job. The Russian media refers to Tulsi Gabbard as a, quote, Russian agent, end quote, and as, quote, girlfriend, end quote, with good reason. Gabbard is worse than unfit. Her public record is as a disinformer and apologist for mass